Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Double Waved Yellows podcast. We've got a double header this week owing to technical issues from last time. So, today we're having a look at the previous Grand Prix, which was the 2021 Russian Grand Prix in Sochi. Lots and lots to talk about. Hodders and Tyson join me as always. Hodders, a highly eventful Russian Grand Prix for the Formula One series.
You can say that again. The weather gods were clearly smiling or frowning, depending on how you interpret it.
Yes, I think they were smiling in terms of Tyson because, I think Tyson, you were fretting about having to cover all of the Formula 2 and the Formula 3 action, but as I'm sure you're about to tell us, we didn't get as many races in.
Yeah, not as many as I was expecting because of the weather conditions, but I'll get into that. But yes, we had Formula 3 and Formula 2, so I'm going to start with Formula 3 because round 7, the final round of the season, it was originally scheduled to take place in America next month, but as a result of unavoidable logistical changes, it was brought forward to Sochi. Dennis Hauger entered with a comfortable lead, 43 points ahead of nearest rival Jack Doohan, with 65 points on offer across the weekend. But Doohan wasn't giving up the championship without a fight, taking pole position in qualifying and scoring himself 4 points, while Hauger qualified ninth, which certainly makes it some excitement going into the first race. Race 1 was scheduled for the Saturday morning, but the elements have different ideas, a ton of rain forecast, and they made the decision to reschedule it later on in the Friday, which turned out to be a great choice. Victor Martin qualified 12th, which put him on pole for race 1. He got a good start, had a battle with Logan Sargent for the first few corners, but then just went wide, which allowed Sargent to take the lead, and he checked out in front for the remainder of the race uncontested. Martin was able to hold on to a podium position, finishing third, but of course the big story was the championship battle between Hauger and Doohan. Doohan unfortunately had a difficult start, slipping down to 15th from reverse pole and just never recovered, but Hauger had a great race, looking to cap off the championship in style with a win, but came up just short of Sargent. But the P2 finish was enough to seal the championship, which makes him the third winner of the new era, following 2019 winner Robert Schwartzman and 2020 winner Oscar Piastri. Both of them went on to graduate to Formula 2, which means no doubt we'll be seeing Hauger on the grid there next year, and I hope he makes a good showing of himself. So the Drivers' Championship was decided, but it was still all to play for in the Teams' Championship. Race 2 was due to take place on the Saturday morning, but was cancelled due to the volatile weather conditions. But Race 3 took place as scheduled on the Sunday morning, with Jack Doohan taking off from pole position, closely followed by Trident teammate Clement Novalak. Hauger, he was involved in a large battle further down the path, but he was taken out of contention by Oliver Rasmussen, and the other Prema drivers, Arthur Leclerc and Ollie Caldwell, also running in the lower points paying positions. Things got pretty tense on the Trident pit wall as the teammates began to fight over first and second, and it even led to a rare team order being issued for them not to fight, which you don't traditionally see in the lower formulas. Frederick Vesti was able to take advantage of the fighting, which gave him second place, but the 1-3 finish, it was enough for Trident to snatch the team's championship at the very last race. So, in summary, Dennis Hauger finished the season on 205 points and took the Formula 3 Drivers' Championship. Jack Doohan finished just behind on 179 after a valiant effort to claw back the deficit, it has to be said. Clement Novalak takes the bronze on 147, and Frederick Vesti finished fourth with 138 points. And Victor Martin ended the season as the highest placed rookie in fifth with 131 points. In the team's championship, just enough for Trident to take it, as I mentioned, with 381 points. They finished just 6 points ahead of Bremer, who finished with 375 points. ART finished third on 256, MP Motorsport fourth with 224, and Charo round out the top five with 127 points. It was a really fun season overall, some great races, and I'm looking forward to seeing what some of these drivers can do next season if they make the move up the ladder, because there is a lot of potential there. But speaking of moving up the ladder, Formula 3 wasn't the only support series running. We had Formula 2 as well, round 6, which saw Oscar Piastri coming into the weekend with a small lead over championship rival Guan Yu. He was looking to extend that gap and had a great start by taking his third consecutive pole position on the Friday. Joe had to settle for fourth, while Dan Tickton qualified 10th, and he was scheduled to start on reverse pole for race one, but as we saw in Formula 3, the weather meant that the race was postponed until later in the afternoon after Formula 1 qualifying. When the session finally got underway, we had drama before the race even started as Felipe Drugovich and Guan Yu spun on the way to the grid. Drugovich made contact with the barriers, and Joe just stalled it, which meant neither of them could take the start. Tickton was able to stay ahead in the wet conditions and converted the reverse pole into a race win. Finishing behind him was Yuri Vips in second, and Robert Schwarzman also had a strong home race to take the final podium spot after a mistake by Liam Lawson took him out of the running. Piastri did what he could starting from reverse pole in 10th, but could only manage a 9th place finish just outside of the points. And as a result of the delayed session, the second sprint race was completely cancelled. The feature race took place on the Sunday morning as scheduled, and that was a dominant victory for Oscar Piastri, taking his second feature win in a row, pulling further ahead in the Drivers' Championship. Teo Porcher moved ahead of the second place starting Jahan Deruvela, and he was able to keep that position while Deruvela had to settle for third. It was an unlucky outing for Ralph Boschung, who looked to be in contention for his first podium of the season, but then had a big lockup which led to a puncture, which resulted in him retiring from the race. Schwartzman finished fourth ahead of sprint race winner Tickton in fifth, and Joe had a pretty tough race, dropping all the way down to eighth at one point, but he was able to make up some positions to finish sixth. So, in the Formula 2 Drivers' Championship, Oscar Piastri extends his championship lead, and he's now got a good advantage, 178 points. Juan Yu remains in second with 142. Robert Schwartzman is closing in on him rapidly after his strong weekend, is now in third with 135 points. And Dan Ticktum and Teo Porcher are keeping their championship chases alive with 129 and 120 points respectively. In the team's championship, Prema have a sizable lead with 313 points. Their nearest competitors are Carlin with 225. Just behind them in third are Univirtuosi on 201 points. Then High Tech are in fourth with 182 points, and ART fifth with 163 points. So, 2 rounds remain, but it's time for yet another long Formula 2 break as the next round is scheduled to take place in, at time of recording, 8 weeks at the new Jeddah track in Saudi Arabia. And it's been a very start-stop season in Formula 2, very long breaks in between rounds, and it seems the FIA have noticed this as they officially announced changes to the weekend format for the 22 season in both Formula 2 and Formula 3. So both series are going to return to the 2-race format, 1 practice, 1 qualifying session. But next year, they're both going to run alongside each other as they did in Sochi. So the main difference from previous years is that the sprint races are going to take place on the Saturday, with the grid decided by reverse top 10 qualifying or top 12 for Formula 3. And the feature races are going to take place on the Sunday, taking the qualifying result from the Friday, as they did this year. And I like the idea of putting the premier races on the Sunday. It gives it more of a main event feel, putting it next to the Formula 1 main race. And before the sprint races on the Sunday, it could feel like a little bit of an afterthought. And it also doesn't mean that someone's weekend is ruined if they have a good qualifying, but then a bad race on the Saturday. And that's everything I have for the support races.
Lovely stuff. Thanks very much, Tyson. A lot to report on there. I think watching the Formula 3 events and just the team radio that was going on, especially the team orders, was just bizarre to watch. And then, the conversation between the drivers and the pit stand afterwards was just incredible. Someone. I mean, yes, you want to fight for their position, but it was almost as if I'm more important than the team, which is an attitude you just don't have in any sport.
Yeah, I think in Formula 3 it's kind of different in that the drivers are employing the teams to give them the equipment rather than in Formula 1 where the teams are employing the drivers because the drivers are really trying to show what they've got. So, yeah, it was rare, it was strange, but I can understand why they made the order.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think I guess the FIA have tried to adapt to the current pandemic, by alternating between Formula 2 and Formula 3, but it hasn't helped the Formula 2 crews by having such long gaps between races. So it'll be good. It's good that they are addressing that issue and obviously switching back to the 2-race format for the 2022
absolutely.
season. Good stuff. Well, Tyson, we look forward to hearing from you at the Saudi Arabian event when we have the last or the penultimate round of the Formula 2 season. Right then, moving on now, as always, to the main event, the Russian Grand Prix. And the main headlines: Lewis Hamilton wins his 100th Formula 1 race. Over 10% of the races, I believe, he's won out, which is a frightening statistic. Lando Norris led for most of the race from pole position. Unfortunately, a dry tyre gamble backfired spectacularly, resulting in him dropping to 7th. And Max Verstappen comes from the back of the grid to finish in 2nd place. A superb performance for the Dutchman. So as always, the 3 drivers we were each paying attention to, and the draw was, of course, done at random. And so my first driver I was drawn up with was the Ferrari driver Carlos Sainz. Qualified 3rd, started 2nd as Bottas took a 15-place grid penalty, the Finn qualifying on pole. Carlos, a fantastic slipstream off of the drivers in and around him to take the lead into turn 2. Led for the first 10-15 laps or so, but was very quickly hunted down by Lando Norris and passed on lap 13. Switched midway through the race from mediums onto the hards, but it's when it got to the end, the last 5 laps, when it did start to get quite interesting. Sainz pitting with just 5 laps to go, on lap 48 to go from the hards onto the inters, and it paid off magnificently with the Spaniard finishing on the podium. Hodders, Carlos had a fantastic weekend all round.
Exactly, he did. He was consistent during practice, up there during qualifying as well. One thing that is notable, I haven't mentioned yet, is when it came to the tyres towards the end, when the weather became a bit more inclement, he was actually giving a heads up to his pit crew 2 laps before he did go in. Guys, we might want to consider inters, which was quite smart thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tyson, as we're going to discuss in quite a fair amount of detail today, the drivers that were sort of preempting the weather and clearly getting their pit stops right for the change from dries to winters, they are the drivers that have earned the big points for the Russian Grand Prix.
Absolutely. The ones who got it right and came into the pits at the right time were rewarded for it.
Absolutely. And that leads on quite nicely, onto Hodders, your first driver, Max Verstappen.
Yes, indeedy, who had already acquired a 3-place grid penalty from the previous race for various incidents, so he took the plunge and took the new engine, thus putting him at the back of the grid, so no time in qualifying, deciding that going into qualifying wasn't really worth the hassle, though he could always warm the tyres up, but he made that decision, that's that. However, he had a full car compared to previous occasions where he scored points with half the car to go to his pit crew, although he did manage to pile the back of the grid into 2nd. He worked his way through the field, and like many other drivers when it came to inters, he was smart, he was in at just the right time, and a very well-earned 18 points.
Yeah, superb. I mean, he was up to 5th before he came in for his first stop, which is absolutely spectacular. And then, yes, Verstappen, like Carlos Sainz, Daniel Ricciardo, and Lando Stroll pitting on lap 48, and my goodness me, that paid off. Tyson, it's great to see these cars coming from the back of the grid to get these big points finishes, the podium finishes. But for the likes of Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, is it almost too easy?
I wouldn't say it's too easy because they've still got to put the work in. They've got to get around everyone. But yes, the top teams, they do have a little bit of an advantage.
And I guess it's also a case that these cars do not want to be seen to have influenced the championship by getting away, whether that's the back markers or those also in contention for the points.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. But we may obviously see those gaps closed up with the introduction of the new car next season. Tyson, that comes on to your first driver, Charles Leclerc. Tell us about his weekend.
Yep, so Charles Leclerc, similar story to Verstappen, just a very different outcome. Qualified 15th, but started from the back because of the penalties, and he tried the hard tyre strategy, but then a bad pit stop cost him dearly, and then he was one of the ones who tried to stay out. It didn't work, pitted way too late for the Inters, and finished 15th as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. He was running fourth on lap 50, but by the time I think he'd gone off on his in lap, much like Lando Norris, and just absolutely plunged down the order to 13th. And then, yeah, as you say, finishing 15th. So very, very poor race when what could have been hot as something so very promising.
Absolutely. I mean, he did well. I mean, he started from the back and parlayed it forward. But again, it's one of the themes of the weekend that pit stop strategies, particularly when it came to the weather, cost dearly. We had a bad pit stop in general. It was far too slow and then going too late. Story of the weekend for many that poor decisions costing dearly.
Absolutely, indeed so. But moving on to my second choice, an ex-Ferrari driver, Fernando Alonso. Qualified 7th, but moved up one place to 6th. An interesting move into turn 2 put him a long way up the grid. Meant he finished the lap in... I'm just checking my notes here. Where is he? Yeah. So that cheeky move at the first chicane put him all the way up into 6th. Ran fairly solidly all the way through the race. Timed his pit stop fairly well. Ended up finishing in P6, bringing home a nice solid amount of points for the Alpine team. Hodders, first and foremost, the move inverted commas in turns 2 and 3 at the chicane. Talk to us about that.
I'm still trying to get my head around it now. I mean, I think he ran off. It would appear on turn 2, although it is. I think we're discussing this before. We'll discuss it till the cows come home and become food, as I've often said before. But it's a hard one, really. I mean, he didn't do anything against the rules, but I suppose it's that age-old argument of letter versus spirit as to whether he gained an unfair advantage intentionally. I think it was accidental, but again, it was gaining of places.
Yeah, I mean, I think the debate as to whether it was accidental, he did do it on the formation, and for those who haven't seen it, basically Alonso deliberately ran wide at turn 2 at a fair amount of speed, it must be said, and sort of weaved his way through the polystyrene bollards, which under the race director's notes he was obliged to do. I think his moves, having watched the replay, he certainly didn't gain any positions, but he avoided losing any positions in turn 2, which I think equally, Tyson, I think you'd say by both letter and spirit, if you fail to lose a position by basically cutting the track, you have gained an advantage.
Yeah, and as we've seen many times before, if you go off the track and gain an advantage, you have to give it back. But here's where I'm going to get controversial. I liked the move. He did set it up on the formation lap, and he pulled it off. He followed the rules to the letter. You could argue unsporting, yes, but he didn't break any rules in the process. And Formula One is all about finding little loopholes like that. So, yeah,
and of course for the next race, they obviously tightened that loophole up.
As they had to,
and I think
fair
Fernando,
enough.
he's a wily old fox, he is, and he will find the loopholes. And to be fair, it was it was smart thinking. So fair play. He clearly had his thinking hat on the formation lap to try it. It worked, and fair play, and a good haul of points brought home. Consistently finishing in the points for that team. Hodders, your driver. I think I think it was the Saturday we did. I think it's the Saturday we did the draw for this. I can't remember. I think it was just
we
before.
generally do it around qualifying.
And
or
you
after
thought you'd hit
Q3.
the jackpot with this one. Lando Norris. Take it away, Hodders.
Well, yeah, Q1 over half a second ahead of Sainz, which, let's face it, in qualifying is a great gap nevertheless. Had a great qualifying in general. He led most of the way. Prior to the rain, Lewis Hamilton was very much catching up, and we were all thinking, we think he's going to hold him off, or he might be overtaken towards the end. And then the blasted rain came on, which, let's face it, and I'm sure the two of you agree, we knew was going to come and was going to happen, but it was more a case of when. The rain continues. The suggestion about going in, maybe going in for inters, to which Lando said plainly no. Unfortunately, as we found a couple of laps later, he aquaplaned and then ended up pitting too late. So I ended up slipping from first down to seventh, and I'll be honest, I'm still sickened by it.
Yeah, they were mentioning it quite a lot afterwards. I think what was really great to see though is because this place can be quite nasty. Social media, for the vast majority, were very full of praise and sympathy for Lando, which was fantastic to see. And we were also saying when we were watching the race together, Lando's call to stay out. It was a brave one. But imagine if he'd pulled it off and he'd gone on to win that race. We'd have all been going, wow, what a call. But these things happen. And Tyson, I'm sure that we will see Lando on the top step of the podium, certainly next year, possibly in the final few races of this year.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. His time will come. He took the gamble, it didn't pay off. And really, Lando and the team just look at it as a learning experience, move on from it, don't dwell on it, and yeah, he will be at the top step of the podium eventually. I believe it.
Yeah, absolutely. And someone who had a not necessarily Gasly, as more like a ghastly weekend. Tell us about Pierre Gasly's weekend, Tyson.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what happened to Gasly. He was looking good in practice. He finished P6 and P3, but then he only managed to qualify 12th. And he also tried the hard tyre strategy, but same as Leclerc, made the wrong choice by staying on the mediums just too long. Pitted later than everyone for the Inters and only managed to finish 13th.
Yeah, not great. And yeah, I mean Gasly was there or thereabouts in the points when it started to rain, and yeah, he was 10th when it started to rain. As I say, ended up finishing well outside the points. Hodders, this is a rarity. Pierre Gasly is normally has been very solid all season. So, is this just a blip?
Now, again, Pierre Gasly, I think the whole AlphaTauri team is a team I have a soft spot for. And to be fair on Pierre, everyone has a bad day. And I think it was one of those bad days, not as much on the office as on the track for Pierre. I don't think it's going to be a sign of things to come. He's always been solid, dependable, and consistent this season. He's had a bad day. Everyone has them.
Absolutely, and hopefully we'll see Pierre back on the podium. It was great to see the joy at Monza last year, and hopefully next season possibly we will see Pierre and the AlphaTauri team back there. Back to myself, and my final driver of choice was George Russell, the Brit qualifying fourth but starting third, and a completely on merit performance again. So Mr. Saturday, well and truly performing. Had a fairly quiet race throughout, but managed to pick his way through all the carnage that was going on with the late deluge to finish in P10. Hodders, Mr. Saturday is now very quickly becoming Mr. Sunday, and we're loving it.
We are absolutely loving it. I mean, his starting third on the grid was an excellent thing to see in the end. I mean, very solid, dependable, and consistent. I use those words a lot, the cliche, but those words are perfect to describe George Russell. He's very much translating Saturdays into Sundays in the points once again, and with him moving to Mercedes, it shows a lot of promise for 2022.
Absolutely. And Tyson, we saw him going wheel to wheel, battling with next year's teammate, Lewis Hamilton, and he was more than a match for him.
Yeah, and if he's a match for him in the Williams, I'm very much looking forward to seeing what he can do when they've got the same equipment.
That is going to be so good to watch. Hodders, your third driver of choice, the Flying Finn, returning from a 2-race hiatus, Kimi Räikkönen.
Bois, yes, it is Mr. Bois himself, Mr. Kimi Räikkönen. Back after 2 races, he originally qualified in 16th. He was well over a second adrift of Charles Leclerc in 16th, but of course, because of the grid penalties, he ended up on the grid in 13th. He had a relatively quiet and uneventful race, although clearly going in for the tyres at the right time paid off, and thus taking him to a final position of 8th, which also means he actually trebles his points tally for the season to 6.
That's pretty good going. Tyson, it seems since the announcement that Kimi was going to be retiring from F1 at the end of the season, it just seems like a new man. He's just been absolutely unleashed, and the performances in both qualifying and the race have been really positive to see.
Yeah, it seems like he's got a bit of that spark back, the Kimi of old, and it's really great to see if he can end his career on a high.
Absolutely so, and who knows, we may actually get more than 2 words out of him on his final press conference race. We will see. Lastly, Tyson, a driver that we actually are really respecting more than ever this season, Sebastian Vettel. He had a really good weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. Vettel had a pretty good weekend. He finished 5th and 9th in the practice, qualified 11th and was able to turn that into 12th. But as we said, he was lucky to keep that after contact with teammate Lance Stroll after he turned into him. But he got his pit strategy right, and yeah, he did well.
Yeah, not too shabby from Seb, and I think Hodders, Sebastian this season has. You look at the results on their own; they've been very up and down. But actually, you look at the performances; they've been growing bit by bit. Just Sebastian settling into the car, bringing his experience. The car and he have developed quite nicely throughout the season.
He really has. I mean, Vettel and Aston Martin have done quite well. He's getting some results on the board. He's showing his own. I mean, yes, he was middling in the pack and, of course, had his misfortune a few races ago with the fuel issue, but he's still very much there. There's a lot of life in him yet.
And Tyson, obviously, I think both this year and next year, the midfield, it is so tight. We could potentially next year see the likes of AlphaTauri, Aston Martin, Williams potentially all battling not just for solid points finish, potential podiums as well, and Alpine as well. And this is going to be such a good season next year. I can't wait.
Yeah, and with the new cars coming in as well, literally anything can happen.
Oh yeah, it's a completely clean slate essentially. Excellent. Thanks very much. Okay, so moving on to our winners and spinners, and this was quite a bit of a discussion, I have to say, when we were putting the notes together for this. But so for me, my winner of the weekend was Lando Norris, a superb pole position in drying conditions, literally the last one across the line to get that pole position, absolutely superb. He then held off Hamilton in the dying stages, made that brave call to stay on the dry tyres. It didn't pay off, and his decision probably cost him the race win. He could have had second had he pitted a lap later, but unfortunately, the 2 extra lap on the dries cost him an absolute certain podium finish. And I think also on the flip side of things, for me, my spinner, it's the McLaren team, because they failed to use all the timing and the weather data at their disposal to bring Norris in for the Inters. And the key bit for me, the timing data, looking at the on the FIA's website. So when Hamilton pitted, they're about 6.1 seconds apart, and it's about 22 to 24 seconds loss on in green flag conditions for a pit stop. So that roughly should have been at the end of the next lap. Lando should have been about 25-30 seconds ahead. Unfortunately, because the conditions were so dire, Lando was only 15 seconds ahead. So they would have realised at that point, okay, we can't pit now, we will lose the lead. But Lando was well over a minute ahead of Max, so they could have pitted, got an absolute dead cert second place. And also, had they looked at the timing also, Verstappen and Ricciardo were about 3 or 4 seconds faster on the intermediates as well. Hoddles, I'll come to you first. It is so frustrating when the timing, even to us casual fans, is just so blatant. It is saying, get your man in now for the Inters, and they didn't go for it.
It was the data was all there, timing, weather, and everything else. As we said before, the radar is known minute by minute to every team that's there. They knew what was available there, and it still boggles me. I mean, really, I think it's a case of the team really needs to be more assertive. I mean, Lando said no, made his choice initially, and I respect that, and I'm not going to knock him for doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the team maybe needs to be a bit more assertive and say, we've got this data which is saying this is why you need to come in. Rather than asking, it's telling him more than it. They should have told him more than anything else.
And Tyson, that's the key bit there. Lando was asked, what do you think about intermediate? He wasn't told, box this lap, it's getting wetter. And that is a very key fundamental flaw from the McLaren technical side.
Yeah, that was the major problem for me, because you have someone like a Lewis Hamilton. He's been in that situation many, many times before. The team will trust him, but they gave him the information, they called him in. Lewis listened to them. Lando, it felt like McLaren, they put the decision in his hands in a situation he's never been in before, leading the race, 4 laps to go, rain coming down, and yeah, he just made the wrong call. The team made the wrong call. I would put it on both sides, but yeah, it wasn't good.
Yeah, it was galling to watch. But as I said earlier, had Lando stayed out and won the race, all the credit would have been given to him for the brave call. But alas. Hodders, on to you. Who had a race to remember and who had a weekend to forget?
Well, my winner, which is one that took me until the night of recording this to decide, I went for Fernando Alonso. He had another very good weekend. It was his 3rd straight point scoring race. His 11th this season to keep him 10th as it stands in the drivers' standings. He maybe could have pitted a little higher had he pitted a little sooner for the Inters, but again, 6th is 6th, and that really can't be complained. He is showing that at the ripe old age of 40, he's still got tricks up his sleeve. And in hindsight, the move on turn 2, sneaky but clever.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. So we've discussed the move and how good would it have been to see Fernando on the podium. It could still happen, but alas, certainly not the case for your spinner.
No, unfortunately, that was Lance Stroll, not Lando Stroll, as you said earlier. But I'm not gonna, I was saving that, you know. He unfortunately broke Rule 1 of F1, which is don't touch your teammate. And then he had the collision with Gasly, which sent Gasly for a 360, who could well have been gunning for points. So the 10-second penalty post-race, which didn't affect the standings admittedly, was thoroughly justified in that situation. He needs to just be more careful. He was a bit careless this race weekend in question.
Yeah, and Tyson, that's been a constant theme this year, is the inconsistency of Stroll, especially when he's got such a great teammate to learn from.
Yeah, that's pretty much been the story of Stroll's career so far. Just he doesn't have the consistency. He has great moments here and there, but then other races, you're just thinking, what is he doing?
Mm-hmm. And finally, let's move on to your winners and spinners, Tyson.
All right, so my winner, Carlos Sainz, just consistency. Consistent practice. He had a really good qualifying, and then he ended up on the podium during the race. And the spinner, I have to be unbiased on this one. It's Lando Norris for me. We've said enough about it already. He was set for the dream weekend, and then they just threw it away with 4 laps to go.
Yeah, so I think we've talked to Des about the situation with Lando, but Holland's Carlos Sainz did have an extremely good weekend. I think the key word there is consistent. From the moment he was on track, that Ferrari was just so good.
Absolutely, he was. He just seems to do everything right. I mean, top 3 in qualification, going up to second. Took lead at turn 2, and barring, being slightly outpaced and among other things, he stayed there. And also consistent thinking, as I mentioned earlier about the suggesting to get the pit crew ready for Inters 2 laps before he went in. Smart thinking, and it paid off handsomely.
It definitely did pay off handsomely. And lastly, an honourable mention for Kimi Räikkönen, one of our honourable winners, finishing P8 after missing 2 races through COVID, and Hodders, as you rightly say, trebling his points haul in one race.
Absolutely. I mean, 4 points out of 6 in one race can't be knocked at all. And again, to get points at 41 can't be knocked at all.
Yeah, and Tyson, they are much needed points for Alfa Romeo, especially in the battle to avoid finishing last.
Yep, absolutely. They need every point they can get, and if I can just quickly add an honourable mention of my own, Max Verstappen, from taking it from 20th all the way up to second.
That's
Agreed.
A very good point, actually, and we didn't really mention him when we should perhaps mention a bit more so, because I think it was tactically sensible to take the engine penalty to introduce it into circulation rather than bring it in on a circuit where you can't really overtake. And Max just absolutely flew through the grid, pitted at the right time for the intermediates, and it was very much damage limitation in terms of the championship, which we will cover shortly.
Yeah, and for a damage control race, 18 points is not a bad haul at all.
Absolutely. Superb. So moving on to the talking point, and the major talking point was, of course, the weather throughout. We had both wet qualifying and a wet race. Hodders, it doesn't always deliver, or sometimes, as we saw at Spa, it over-delivers, but the wet weather really contributed to a great weekend of action.
It very much did. I mean, we were wondering all throughout the race, when's the rain going to come? When it does come, what's going to happen? Will we get a safety car, etc., etc.? Which, fortunately, we didn't. I mean, sometimes we wish for a safety car, but we wouldn't wish it on any instance anybody. But again, sometimes people forget sometimes that a late bit of rain can change absolutely everything, as it did. Not only does it change the positions, it changes mindsets as well. It gets teams to thinking, because they've got that data, when to bring them in. Do you bring them in?
Yeah, and Tyson, we've often seen teams guilty of this, of sort of radar watching, when there's the classic method of checking the weather by just putting an upturned palm down.
Either that or send the tall bald man out. He'll be the first to tell
you. Very much so, very much so. And I say, a bit of rain, it does often spice it up. Obviously, we want it in sensible quantities. We don't want it to turn it into a farce, nor do we want it to be dangerous. So moving on to the Drivers' Championship standings at the end of the Russian Grand Prix, the gap is narrowed to just 2 points. Lewis on 246.5 points, Max on 244.5 points. Bottas remains in third on 151 points. Lando, he will be seriously ruining what could have been, as he remains on in fourth place on 139. Sergio Perez on 120. Carlos Sainz, the big mover, up to sixth on 112.5 points. In the Constructors' Championship, Mercedes still stay ahead, 397.5 points, Red Bull on 364.5 points. Still fairly close for third and fourth. McLaren on 234, Ferrari on 216.5. Alpine pulling away in fifth on 103 from AlphaTauri on 84, Aston Martin on 59, Williams fairly secure in 8th place on 23, and Alfa Romeo with those crucial points on 7 points. Haas still yet to score. Also, it's been announced that we have a change to the calendar. We finally have confirmed the Qatar night race will be added on the 21st of November. So, Tyson, we will complete the longest F1 season with 23 races.
Yep, we will. And I'm kind of curious how Qatar's going to work out, because it's traditionally a bike track as far as I know.
Yeah, and Hodders, we've looked at the circuit layout, and it doesn't seem as if there's much in the way of straights. You know, it's basically seems to be a lot of corners.
Yeah, which also begs the question, will we see that many overtakes or use of DRS? It just... I don't know. I mean, I'm still of the opinion that really that weekend should be left blank, but of course, you know, F1 being what it is, the more races the merrier in the view of some.
Absolutely. Well, we just have to wait and see what happens. So, coming up, as I mentioned at the top of the show, it is a bit of a double header this week. So we will be recording the podcast for the Turkish Grand Prix later in the week. That will be out on Friday, and then building up to the next event, which is the US Grand Prix at the Circuit of the Americas. That is on the 24th of August. We'll aim to have the podcast out just before Halloween, so a little bit of treats there, and hopefully no tricks in there. Hodders, we've also got for the first time ever a double header of the W Series.
Oh yes, we have. We have races on not just the Saturday, but also the Sunday as well. I mean, I have to say the timing's not going to be too bad. I mean, yes, it's going to be a late one on Saturday. I mean, the first race starts at 25 past 11 UK time, but it does follow less than half an hour after the qualifying for F1. So it's nice to have them on the level there. And I think having two races will certainly do well for America as well. I think the Americans will love to see it. And it also means a home race ×2 for Sabre Cook, who will hopefully get a point on the board.
Yeah, we hope so. And Tyson, of course, it's the season finale. 2 races with the title up for grabs, and it's absolutely neck and neck at the top.
Yep, it's been a very close season so far. I'm looking forward to seeing how it ends.
Mm-hmm. And one thing we should mention, and should definitely applaud, is that the W Series have turned pink this month in aid of breast cancer awareness. Okay. Right, well, that is all from myself, Hodders, and Tyson. Thank you very much for tuning in and for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a comment. You can also follow us now on Twitter. What a weird concept that is. Who'd have thought? Yep, so you can follow us at twitter.com/DWavedYellows. We're on there, so please give us a follow on there and drop us a little hello message. Let us know what your thoughts are on podcast. Any suggestions you've got, we're more than happy to see what we can do with that. We will obviously speak to you again in a few days' time for the Turkish Grand Prix, and then in a couple of weeks' time where we will have a lot of reviewing to do from the Circuit of the Americas. From all of us here, be good, and if you can't be good, be safe. Take care, everybody.